Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. We're back online. We got our RBN internet connection going, and so we're going to be moving forward with that. Michelle Rosen, who was supposed to have been our third-hour guest on Friday, will be our third-hour guest today, catching up on latest developments from the Tylenol poisoning case from 30 years ago. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in the control room, his hand hovering over the phone, ready to swoop on down when you call him with your questions and comments. Obviously, the big news, of course, is the Senate is going back into session right now, debating this hotly contested, continuing resolution to fund the government, to keep it going, even though they're running out of money to raise. Basically, they're raising the debt ceiling. They're getting another credit card and sticking your great-grandchildren with the payments for that. Obama actually came out and said raising the debt ceiling won't raise the government's debt, which is right up there with George Orwell saying war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, warming is cooling, and all of these other nonsensical things they're trying to sell us here. And basically, the issue is very much focused on this Obamacare. The House originally passed their version of the emergency funding bill to raise the debt ceiling, but included defunding Obamacare. Now, Congress has the right to do that. Congress can pass a law and then turn around and defund it if it turns out to be a boondoggle. They've done it before. The original Obamacare legislation did not have any funding in it. And so it's well within the purview of the Congress to say, we just don't have the money to pay for this thing here right now. Of course, the Senate stripped out the defunding language and sent it back to the House. The House then sent back another bill to the Senate calling for a one-year delay on Obamacare, which makes a lot of sense when you understand that the software that is supposed to be implementing Obamacare is nowhere near ready to go into operation tomorrow. But the Senate is apparently, the Senate Democrats are saying, by golly, this is all about the president, and if you're opposed to Obamacare, you're just being racist, and on and on and on. So we'll see what is going to be the final outcome. But we're basically looking at a government shutdown starting at midnight tonight Eastern Time. Now, of course, it's only a partial shutdown. They're going to shut down all the national parks. They're going to close the National Zoo. They're going to close all the social services. Veterans benefits will be suspended. But, of course, things like the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Defense, they're still going to be rock and rolling all the time. The instruments of tyranny never get defunded. The partial government shutdown is shutting down those services that you taxpayers actually pay for and expect back. It's kind of a way of punishing you. How dare you not go along with the tyrant's wishes here? So that's what they mean by a partial shutdown, shutting down the things that you, the American people, need and depend on, and leaving in place the machinery of tyranny. Now, I think the reason they're so focused on Obamacare, and they're trying to make that the issue, is they're trying to distract Americans from the real question. We talked about this last week, and you should be sharing this with all your friends. Under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States of America, the federal government is allowed to create and issue its own interest-free money. That's the way this nation was started. So why is the government going to a privately owned bank and borrowing instantly created out of thin air money at interest? Does it make any sense at all? And that's the real question, because even though the Federal Reserve Act was passed 100 years ago, it did not repeal Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Every president has the authority to tell the Treasury, look, start issuing interest-free money and put it into circulation to power the commerce. John F. Kennedy did it with his Executive Order 11110. And, of course, 5 months later, he was shot dead in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. And his United States notes were withdrawn from circulation by President Johnson and destroyed to deliver us back bound hand and foot into the slavery of the private central bankers. But that's the real question when they talk about debt ceiling must go up, must go up. Why? when the U.S. government has the legal authority to issue their own debt-free, interest-free money, why are they borrowing from a private central bank that's just printing it up out of thin air or typing it into a computer? There's no backing to the money other than future tax revenues of the American people. And that is the real question, not whether or not you support Obamacare, but why is the U.S. government borrowing its money from a private central bank when it has the legal, lawful authority to just create and issue its own money interest-free? That is the question every single American ought to be asking right now. And of course, because of all the financial dimensions, I reprised some of my earlier articles to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, including the 11th marble, which basically lays out why private central banks are a debt trap. It's a deliberate device to enslave people and nations to debt. And the whole idea of the 11th marble is any 5-year-old child knows that if you put 10 marbles into a tin can, you can only take 10 marbles back out. Private central bankers who are issuing the public currency as a loan at interest are operating on the belief they can put 10 marbles or dollars into the tin can, the economy, and magically get 11 marbles back out. Thus, we may conclude that the bankers are dumber than 5-year-old children. But what's really going on is the creation and maintenance of a permanent state of indebtedness to the private bankers in order to reduce you to being their slaves. That's really what's going on, because the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper, the Federal Reserve note, went into circulation, more money is owed to the Federal Reserve than actually exists. It doesn't matter how hard the American people work. It doesn't matter how much they sacrifice. That debt can never be paid off by design. The system's designed that way to always produce more debt than money with which to pay the debt. That's the trap. And this nation fought a revolution to be free of that kind of predatory banking, only to be sold back into the slavery to private central banks, not once but 3 times by our corruptible and corrupted politicians. And so the question, as this debate rages on about raising the debt ceiling, the focus shouldn't be on Obamacare. The focus is on why is the government borrowing its money at interest from a private bank when it has the lawful authority to create and issue its own money? That's the question. You need to get on your social media, your email list, and every blog everywhere talking about this debt ceiling and just ask that question. Why is the U.S. government borrowing money at interest from a private bank when it has the lawful authority to create and issue its own interest-free money? That's the question they don't want you thinking about. That's why they're waving Obamacare all over the place. They don't want you even beginning to think about what a stupid model it is for a government to surrender its lawful authority to create and issue interest-free money and borrow it at interest from private bankers. And where do the private bankers get that money? They just print it up or type it into computers. It's a scam. It is a 100-year-old scam. There shouldn't be a question of raising the U.S. debt ceiling. If the U.S. government had followed the original economic model of the United States of America, there wouldn't be $200 trillion in debt on the U.S. government ledgers right now, which they're expecting you to pay off with future tax revenues that will be taken from you, for which you will get nothing in return. And when they take your work product from you without giving anything back, that's slavery. And for all those young people who are just coming of voting age this year, they never had a chance to vote on any of this stuff and say, I agree to this or not. They are born into debt bondage to these private central bankers without their permission. And it's time for it to stop. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the debate on the floor of Congress has been rancorous. Everybody's grandstanding, trying to hook their particular agenda into this resolution being passed, including defunding birth control. Everybody's jumping onto this thing, trying to get everything they want, because this bill must pass. And every time there's a must-pass bill, everybody's putting riders on it to get things that they know would never survive an independent vote in the Congress. And by the way, when we're talking about the blueprint for the new America, I think absolutely unrelated riders on bills must be banned, because a lot of bad law gets rammed through the Congress by piggybacking on other bills. And I'll give you a good example. The Homeland Security Act that created the Department of Homeland Security, the new Gestapo, had a rider sitting on it to grant indemnification to the manufacturers of vaccines, so that if the vaccine makers are pumping something into your arm that actually hurts you, you can't sue them, because vaccines are critical to the nation's ability to deal with a terror attack, and so forth and so on. So that definitely has to go with the blueprint for the new America. That every bill in Congress does one and only one purpose, and nobody's allowed to just put a whole... You probably see it on some of the legislation over there at the government websites, where it says a bill to enable something, something, and other purposes. And it's that other purposes where they're just sneaking stuff in there that they know would not pass Congress all by itself, and they just tack it onto a bill they know is going to pass. That does not represent the will of the people. It's not the way the government is supposed to function. Apparently, Republican Representative Mark Meadows on the House floor was just saying, we did not elect a dictator. Well, we seem to have gotten one. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Art off the grid. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. This might get a little confusing, so please bear with me, but I'm trying to understand something. A question came up this morning, and no, I don't have an answer for it. First of all, if I understand the true concept of government as is outlined in the Constitution, the government isn't supposed to own anything, is it? And this is just a simple yes or no question to get to what I really want to get to.
Well, technically, all the public properties, like the national parks and everything, are the heritage of the American people and belong to the people collectively. The government does maintain its own private military reservations and things like that, but it's kind of a gray area. The government wasn't supposed to own anything, but it was supposed to manage it for the American people. But starting with the District of Columbia, they started breaking the rules. But certainly all those public lands that were grabbed and pledged as collateral against U.S. government borrowing, that is the property of the people.
You've answered the question. I just wanted to know, first of all, whether or not the government is actually supposed to own anything, and the answer is no.
Yes.
Now, here is where it gets interesting, because this has to do with banking and money. In the Constitution, it states clearly that Congress has the authority to coin money and set the value of that money based upon a specific certain weights and measures.
Yes.
Now, we know that real money, as is understood through this process, is gold, silver, and such as this.
Yes.
So if the government can't own anything, or isn't supposed to own anything, this means the government is not going to be able to own any gold mines or silver mines or anything else like that. That is the ownership of the people themselves own the gold mines and the silver mines.
And the people own the currency. The public currency under that model is a public utility.
So here's my question, and this is where we're having a serious conundrum here trying to figure this one out. Because if we can restore our republic, we have to understand how this is going to work. If Congress and the government can print up all these treasury bonds and exchange them for Federal Reserve notes, it only makes sense that they can print their own dollar bills and do them the same as they would any other without interest.
You are absolutely correct.
If they have the authority to coin money, as well as print these treasury notes, which are supposed to be backed by gold and silver, if they have the ability and the authority to coin the money, if they can't own the mines, how do they acquire the gold and the silver to coin the money if they can't own the mines that produces the gold? They have to get the gold from somewhere. Where do they get it, and how do they get it?
Okay, well, first of all, back when the United States was starting, gold, and the government does in fact own gold, or it's supposed to manage it for the American people down there in Fort Knox. It was supposed to be the property of the people being managed by the government for the benefit of the nation. The government defined the dollar as a weight measure of silver to match the value of dollars around the world, going all the way back to the Thaler mines of Germany. And the paper notes were just claim checks. The paper notes were never the money. The money was always the silver and gold. And the government basically managed the silver and gold as money as part of its lawful function to manage the country, to keep the money uniform so that everybody could trust it, that they were, when they accepted one of these coins, that there was the same value in that coin from time to time to time. But technically, all of it was the property of the people.
Well, herein is where I run into my problems, because if I put let's say, for example, I have, just say 100 ounces of silver, okay, and I put it into the Treasury for safekeeping. They're going to protect it for me. They puts it in a vault and whatnot. Now, if they need to coin some silver dollars, silver 50-cent pieces, silver dimes, whatever, does that mean they have the authority to take my silver and coin it and spend it in circulation? But that's my silver.
If it's your silver as a personal, private American citizen, in theory, no, they don't. But we know the U.S. government is getting ready for Cyprus-style haircuts. Where the U.S. government got its silver and gold for coinage was through tariffs, basically taxes on mines, where so much percentage of the output of the mine was to be given to the government. It's still today, if you find a shipwreck in U.S. territorial waters, the government gets 25% of everything that you find on there, including silver and gold.
So the way that's what I was getting at. The way that they acquired their gold and silver to coin the money is through the taxes.
Yeah, but again, in theory, that silver and gold is still collectively the property of the American people, and the government was supposed to safeguard it and use it for our behalf. Of course, the government has long ago gotten into the attitude of they actually own everything, and this idea that we, the American people, are the true possessors and managers of this nation is sort of considered a romantic fantasy, where you get George Bush saying, the Constitution is just a blankety-blank piece of paper.
Right. Hey, well, Mike, I appreciate it. That's what we've been sitting here for like 2 hours trying to figure this out, and I was like, well, let's, Mike's coming on. Let's give him a call.
Let me give you a real-world example. Let's say that you own a business, and the business has money that belongs to the business, and you hire an accountant to manage those bank accounts. That doesn't mean the accountant owns that money that they're moving around, and that's exactly the same model. The government is a caretaker of the nation's sovereignty. They're like a janitor. And they are hired by the people and entrusted with certain authorities to manage this nation for the benefit of the nation and its people. This government has basically started acting like an employee who thinks now they're in charge of the company and owns it, and they can start selling typewriters and copy machines out the back door to cover the mistakes the accounting department made. And that is simply not the way it's supposed to be. We got to take another break for commercials. We got another phone call waiting when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome back. What's on your mind today?
Hey there, Michael. How you doing, brother? Hey, I want to talk about the puzzle today, Mike, and just stay with me, and then I'll ask a few questions. Mike, you remember, first of all, we were talking quite a long back about, I'll give you a head start about the grid, and I'll leave it at that right now, but remember they had that Boy Scout thing out east, I believe, a while back, and there was everybody there, the military, police, state patrols, and they were handing out something. Interest was a sheet, what to do if there was a chemical attack. So I'll puzzle that one at you first. Now, I have got to ask you this, Mikey, that with the trucker strike coming this October, and we got the government bouncing back the yo-yo, something serious to talk about is our grid and what's going to taking place out east right now, what we mentioned a while back with FEMA in the 5 states. Mike, the thing is this, they're saying in November, and you can check the GX out, they're in control of the grids, they're saying that there's going to be a sunburst possibly CME flares strong enough to knock out satellites, to knock them to the ground. But then again, you look at the situation with Lindsey Graham talking about something going on in South Carolina out east. Boy, oh boy, you got to wonder if they're going to stage what we were talking about with the grid and the cyber attack of trying to get this thing started back up with Syria and Iran and blame it on them. So I just wanted to throw that at you because they're saying, you can check this out yourself, November 13th and 14th, they're talking about shutting down the power grid out east, and they say that will probably affect Canada, Mexico, United States, and now I'm picking up part of more of the world. So, Mike, I just wanted to throw that puzzle at you, and maybe you could to solve it for me. So thank you for taking my call, big guy, and take care, brother. I love you.
All right. Well, first of all, there's a couple of overlapping issues here. First of all, at this point, I think it's very obvious that the government of the United States and the government of Israel are seriously considering and already starting the propaganda run-up for some kind of a new false flag, a new 9/11, to reinvigorate the war fever in the American people, to go on out and just lay waste to the rest of the world that will not swear undying fealty to private central bankers. What that false flag attack, what form it'll take, of course, is a matter for speculation. At this point, airplanes crashing into buildings is now kind of passé. So they're going to have to come up with something even more terrifying. We know that we have this Lindsey Graham saying there was going to be a nuke in Charleston Harbor on the same week that apparently a nuclear weapon was transferred across the United States without the proper paper trail. And now we know the number 2 person at the Strategic Air Command who's in charge of all these nuclear weapons has been removed from authority, supposedly over a gambling scandal. And I'm not buying that story one bit, because if you're going to start firing officers in the military for gambling, 2/3 of them would be wearing civilian clothes by now. So I think something's going on in that dimension. There's another possibility, and that, of course, we've already talked about, the virtual 911, which is at the point where it's very obvious the American financial system is going to crash. The U.S. government would crash the computer systems of all the banks in Wall Street and say, well, we don't really know who owes what to anybody at any point, and it wasn't our fault. It was an act of war by those dastardly Russian, Chinese, Iranian, North Korean hackers. That's another possibility. Another one would be a staged bioweapons attack with, like, anthrax, which has very low secondary communicability, so you're not risking a runaway, out-of-control contagion. And they could do that in a couple of cities all across the country to make the sense of terror feel immediate. Because if they do something in Charleston Harbor, everybody west of the Mississippi, it's far away and not our problem. But if they're dotting a city here and a city here and a city here, and 10 or 20 people come down with anthrax, that's a more immediate sense of dread. And they could do combinations of all three. One thing we have noticed before from these false flag attacks is they go for largely symbolic targets, icons in our national identity, and they don't actually do anything that's going to cause a huge amount of financial loss to the large corporations. So when they're talking about a shutdown of the grid, my understanding is it is a simulation of disconnecting individual power markets and generators from what's called the interconnect, which is supposed to keep everything balanced and in synchronization. And it doesn't mean they're deliberately blacking out the eastern seaboard and parts of Canada. They're simply going to say, you're going to run on your own for a little while we test out the system. Now, I remember some years ago during a major storm in California, the Pacific Interconnect went down, but we still had lights. They were sort of fluctuating up and down. It was kind of a bad situation, especially for computer users. But I think that's what's going on. But they're not going to do something that actually causes a lot of damage. I had somebody sent me an email saying, what if they were to blow up Hoover Dam and claim that Iran did it? The economic harm from blowing up Hoover Dam would be prohibitive. First of all, having to replace the dam and all the downstream flooding all the way down to Los Angeles, the loss of electricity. While a real terrorist might consider that, I think a false flag plotter is going to say, no, it's going to cost too much to do that. We need a symbolic target. And I keep thinking that the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is just perfect for that kind of an operation because it's an icon of America. Everybody knows what the Golden Gate Bridge, and it is old, and it's coming up due for replacement, just like the Bay Bridge had to be replaced. These things do have a finite lifespan, despite all the maintenance going into them. And so I would not be surprised if there was a huge bomb on the Golden Gate Bridge that was blamed on Iran or Syria or whoever it is we're going to attack and invade. But I don't see them knocking down the entire U.S. power grid or blowing up Hoover Dam or something that's actually going to cost a lot of money because, you know, they're going for something where the cost is minimal. And remember, the World Trade Towers, when they got knocked down in that false flag, they were looking at a hugely expensive renovation to get rid of the asbestos that had been used inside there. Was going to bankrupt Larry Silverstein, which is why everybody was wondering why he had worked so hard to gain control of the World Trade Towers, knowing the EPA was going to make him spend billions and billions of dollars. But then luckily for Larry, the evil terrorists knocked down the World Trade Towers. The first responders cleaned up all that asbestos, and they're still dealing with the medical things. Larry got his insurance payment and built the whole new tower. How very fortunate for him. So the St. Louis Arch, the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., because that's already been damaged by that fracking quake. These are all iconic targets. They're of zero military value, and they're of minimal economic harm if they get destroyed. It's a symbolic target, and that's what these false flag plotters like to go look at. So that's kind of where we are on that. Alrighty, getting back to the economy and the government shutdown, we're seeing all these articles, you know, how to prepare for the government shutdown. And, of course, my advice is, step one, change all the locks on all those federal buildings while they're gone. And two, throw a really, really wild party. Because the government has shut down before, and it didn't bring down the entire country. There's a lot of fear-mongering going on out there, trying to get people to call their Congress critics and say, oh, yes, fund Obamacare, fund the emergency spending thing. But again, the question we all should be asking of ourselves and our friends and family and coworkers, why is the government borrowing money at interest from a privately owned bank when Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution allows the government to create and issue its own interest-free money? Why? Somebody just sent me a wonderful quote by Thomas Edison, who was writing in the New York Times just a couple of years after the Federal Reserve Act was passed. And Edison said, quote, if our nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The element that makes the bond good makes the bill good also. The difference between the bond and the bill is the bond lets money brokers collect twice the amount of the bond and an additional 20%, whereas the currency pays nobody but those who contribute directly in some useful way. It is absurd to say that our country can issue $30 million in bonds and not $30 million in currency. Both are promises to pay, but one promise fattens the usurers and the other helps the people. So even Edison understood. This is just a scam on the people. These private central bankers have been preying on the people of planet Earth for hundreds and hundreds of years with this scam, knowing that governments can always be bought for enough gold to sell their populations into slavery. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're getting word that the Senate voted down the latest House spending resolution, the one that called not for defunding Obamacare, but delaying it for a year. And so we have, it's very obvious at this point that these politicians are listening to their egos, because the sad reality is Obamacare is not ready to go. That $88 million software package that is supposed to track your medical records and calculate what benefits you are or are not entitled to is not ready to go. And the only reason everybody that's pushing Obamacare is still out there saying, I'm standing firm, you will fund Obamacare, or else, and you will start it tomorrow, they're listening to their ego. And they're not really thinking about the reality of the situation. if they move forward with Obamacare launching tomorrow, it is going to be a disaster trying to clean up all the errors in that database. And nobody has any idea how bad the errors in this system are. What if the wrong prescriptions are put in your record because of a software glitch? Death by computer failure. It's not ready to go. But the Senate is, their ego is on the line here. I'm right, even when I'm wrong, I'm right. And they're moving forward on that. Getting all these other warnings. Veterans benefit payments will be disrupted if the shutdown goes beyond 2 weeks. Well, good. I think it's time the veterans got angry with the government that made them veterans, complete with drug addiction to SSRIs. And now apparently the VA's been just overprescribing opiates to veterans, some of whom are already known to be drug addicts. It's just abysmal here. Now, the official Obamacare website just had a very small edit, because it used to, have the topic, where can I get free or low-cost care in my community, saying you can go to your community health center. Well, they took out the reference to free. So we're already getting mission creep here. Oh, it was going to be great. It was going to save money. It was going to improve health care. And then over time, we get Nancy Pelosi saying, we never said it was going to lower health costs. Of course it's going to raise health costs. Now, I'm seeing a bunch of articles out here, and this is over at freedomforum.com with the number 4 in there. Americans aren't bound to pay the government's debt. And they're basically going into all the reasons why the American people should not fall for this belief that the government can just spend recklessly, give money away to bankers, give money away to foreign governments, and spend all this money on foreign wars of conquest, and that we have no choice but to say, yes, we will pay this, and our children will pay it, and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will pay it. And the reality is there is an internationally recognized principle under international law called odious debt, which is that we, the people, are responsible to repay monies borrowed by the government for taking care of the American people. Good roads, good schools, good hospitals. Odious purposes, such as war, political repression, spying on the people. We're not responsible for that debt. Why? Because we didn't agree with it. That's really what it comes down to. This government is taking our money and spending it on things we never agreed our money should be spent on. And this government is borrowing money without our permission and spending it on more things that we, the people, don't agree with. I ran a poll over on my website, Is America Headed in the Wrong Direction? Kind of as a check on a similar poll run in the corporate media. Their numbers came out about half and half. Ours came out 98% said, yes, America is headed in the wrong direction. And the 6 votes that voted no, I presume, are all those various government monitors who monitor our website to make sure we're not saying something the government doesn't like, which is pretty much everything that comes out of my mouth and into my keyboard here. Now, the United States is not the only place that is feeling the impending collapse of this private central banker economic model that leeches real wealth from the people to put in the pockets of the bankers, while the people and their nation and their infrastructure are allowed to decline. Over in Spain, the government there has just approved pension reform, which means the pensions are going to be gutted. Same thing we're seeing here in the United States of America. We're sorry we promised you all these pensions, and you paid in and we paid in, but we've got to take that money and we've got to give it to the banks, because we've got to keep that bottom line on the ledger black to show to the world here. And Spain also has frozen all public sector pay. Spanish people aren't happy about that, especially over in Catalan. Over in Great Britain, there's been a march, 55,000 people marching against planned UK government spending cuts. And again, the spending cuts are all on those services for the benefit of the British subjects. They're not cutting the war budget. They're not cutting the budget for spying on the people. They're not cutting the budget for the instruments of dictatorship and tyranny. All the cuts fall on those things that take care of the people. Now, the Italian government is in a stage of upset because apparently Berlusconi's party has just withdrawn, breaking the coalition. They're trying to deal with their economic difficulties over there. Over in Greece, last week we heard this situation where the Greek army was demanding that the pro-banker president step down, and they were going to have this huge rally on Saturday to demand that. Greece blocked the rally on Saturday. They simply said, anybody who shows up will be arrested. They cordoned it off. Now they're executing a crackdown. They're arresting all kinds of people who are speaking out against the government. They've arrested several leaders of Golden Dawn, and everybody else they've arrested they claim are neo-Nazis. We have to arrest the neo-Nazis. So they're demonizing anybody who's speaking out against the failed economic policies of the Greek government. They're throwing them in jail. Now, Tunisia's government is stepping down, getting ready for new elections there. Bahrain is continuing their crackdown. They've just jailed 37 Shias for up to 15 years. The system cannot be made to work. That is the problem with private central banking. It cannot be made to work forever. It works really well at the very beginning to make those bankers insanely rich, but over time, because by design it builds up debt faster than it builds up the money supply, you get to a point of complete crash where the nation's entire energies are being siphoned off just to prop up this pyramid of debt. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, is over here in the United States screaming that Obama can't listen to Rouhani, there can't be any compromise, got to keep the sanctions in place. And unfortunately, sadly, it does look like Obama is going along with that. We just saw this story over in the Israel National News where Obama is saying, absolutely, we will make sure Iran does not get nuclear weapons and we will keep the sanctions in place. And not only are they keeping the current sanctions in place, apparently Senators Menendez and Graham penned op-eds in the New York Times saying there have to be more sanctions against Iran. We've got to have more sanctions against Iran here. So let me see if I have this right. The U.S. government has maxed out its credit cards and might shut down today. The Ponzi scheme, private central bank, has buried the nation in unpayable debt. There are millions of Americans going jobless, hungry, and homeless. Our national infrastructure is crumbling from neglect, and yet these two senators, handsomely paid by U.S. tax dollars, can find time to push for more sanctions against Iran, which has not actually done anything they're not legally allowed to do under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nobody's found any evidence at all that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. And Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another nation in over 200 years, quite a contrast with the U.S. and Israel, which can't seem to go for 6 months without bombing somebody. Now, this push for new sanctions, despite a total lack of evidence of wrongdoing, is like a police officer writing you a traffic ticket because you can't prove you won't run a red light next week. Does that make any sense at all? Me neither. We got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. I got a bunch of stuff I got to get through before Michelle joins us at the top of the next hour here. So Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C., meeting with Obama, setting, in fact, here's a direct headline. This was over in Times of Israel. Netanyahu's mission, setting parameters for Obama's Iran diplomacy. Now, where in the Constitution is the foreign head of a sovereign nation allowed to set parameters for U.S. foreign policy? It's just not there. And Obama's caved in already. Being reported in Russia today that Obama has said absolutely we will keep the military option on the table regarding Iran's nuclear weapons, which Iran doesn't have. Nobody's found any evidence. This is a repeat of what they did to sell the Iraq war with us. Oh, it's weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. Be afraid. Throw your babies onto the enemy's bayonet. And Netanyahu's in there screaming about Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons and saying, it's a crisis, it's global warming. I'm sorry, it's Iran's nuclear weapons, it's a crisis. This is coming from a nuclear-armed nation that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow International Atomic Energy Agency inspections, and was caught trying to sell a clandestine nuclear weapon to the former government of South Africa, which is the activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to be preventing. And again, nowhere in the Constitution of the United States is there anything about allowing a foreign head of state any say at all in how the U.S. conducts its foreign policy. Netanyahu's out there trying to say, don't be fooled by Iran. Don't you dare be fooled by Iran. If you're going to be made fools of, Israel will make a fool of you because that's our job. Don't you be fooled by Iran. Only be fooled by Israel. And they fooled us a lot of times. Now, National Security Advisor Susan Rice is saying that the sanctions against Iran will stay until it proves it isn't seeking a bomb. Now, this, of course, is typical of the unobtainable objectives being set by anybody who wants to make sure any possible deal is going to fail. Because Susan Rice is demanding Iran prove a negative, which any student of logic will tell you is impossible. The burden of proof is on the United States or Israel to prove that Iran is doing something justifying sanctions and invasion, and they can't come up with it. So they're falling back on this debate tactic of saying, you have to prove that you are innocent, and we're going to punish you until you prove you're innocent. It's a return to the Napoleonic Code. It's not what America is supposed to be about, where proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is delivered first before punishment is inflicted. And as I said before, the current U.S. policy toward Iran is like a police officer writing you a traffic ticket this week because you can't prove you won't run a red light next week. That's really what it comes down to. Avador Lieberman is out there saying Israel should attack Iran alone. Great, go for it, Avi. I would love for Israel to go on and start attacking Iran all by itself. And then when they wind up tangled with Russia and China, we, the people of the United States of America, ought to just sit back and say, hey, you got into this mess. There's an old wisdom that the best way to stop a dog from chasing a car is to let them catch one. But Israel has survived to this point, starting these wars and then stepping back and letting Americans come in and clean up the mess for them. Go ahead, Israel, attack Iran. And then when Iran comes in and starts routing your people the way the Lebanese succeeded in doing, and Israel resorts to its nuclear arsenal, then it will be before the entire world that Israel's been lying all this time, proclaiming we're helpless, the Arabs are coming for us, we're so weak, please give us billions of dollars in weapons, we're just so helpless here. They're not. They're the world's 6th largest nuclear power. They're just cowards. They don't want to fight their own wars. They want American men and American women to fight their wars for them. And they understand that the U.S. government and Wall Street have their own motives for a war with Iran. That they're taking advantage of, saying, come on, you guys want to attack Iran anyway, just do it for us. And meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has come out and said that this deal with Syria regarding their chemical weapons is only going to work if the U.S. government goes into those hired mercenaries they're supporting and demands they surrender their chemical weapons as well. Now, of course, that's a non-starter because the U.S. government's entire claim that Assad gassed his own Alawite women and children rests on their claim that the hired mercenaries don't have chemical weapons, which we already know is a lie. They've been caught with all kinds of chemical weapons, including sarin. Turkey just indicted a bunch of these hired mercenaries they arrested on their side of the border in possession of sarin gas. So the U.S. is counting on the hired mercenaries staging more gas attacks so they can say, oh, see, Assad kept chemical weapons away from the deal. See, he lied. That's what they're going to do to try and get this thing going again. Alrighty, now there's a new scandal breaking over at the NSA, and reporter Glenn Greenwald is starting to put this out, where it turns out that the NSA's constant surveillance on everybody in the entire world is a key part of the U.S. government's targeted assassination program. That little death list they cook up with. Where's the NSA getting their raw intelligence to decide that this person is a terrorist that needs to be blown up in a drone strike? Facebook posts, MySpace, text messages. So that's another huge scandal coming out for the NSA here. Now, John McAfee, who started the McAfee computer security product line, and then he sold it out and he's retired and enjoying life a great deal. He's a very colorful gentleman. Now he is coming out and saying he's going to start a whole new company. And this company is going to design an internet that is hack-proof, which would be really kind of a good thing to have, I think. And McAfee says if the U.S. government bans its sale in order to go on spying on you, the American law-abiding citizen who's done absolutely nothing wrong, he says he'll sell it around the rest of the world. England, Japan, any place that wants to be free from internet spying, he will sell this internet to them. Good for John. Good for John. Another aspect of the NSA spy scandal is it's sparking what is called cloud nationalism. In other words, foreign nations that are adopting the cloud storage architecture are basically deserting the U.S.-based cloud vendors. And they're just financing development of cloud architecture within their own countries that is firewalled against NSA spying. And this is a major financial hit for the U.S.-based cloud vendors who accepted a little bit of cash from the NSA to open up the back doors for them. And now they're finding their bottom line is taking a clubbing. Nobody wants to use the U.S.-based cloud services because they know the NSA has totally compromised them. Now, getting on down to the situation in Nairobi and that mall attack, and more evidence continues to surface. It was another staged false flag to get us all thinking about terrorists and Al-Shabaab and the rest of it. Apparently, the Israeli government warned the Kenyan government ahead of time that this attack was going to take place, which is more evidence the mall attack was a false flag. Apparently, the U.S. government knew in advance. That's why there were so many American intelligence agents on the ground there when it happened. Remember how long it took for the U.S. to get aid into New Orleans following Katrina? That was really unexpected. But by golly, they're Johnny on the spot for these false flag terror attacks. Remember, they were in New York the night before 9/11 happened. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the obvious signs of fakery in the attack in the at the mall in Nairobi. And, of course, for me, the most damning piece of evidence is that photograph of the gentleman in the white jacket where there's a red stain on his back that is clearly separating as it travels through the fabric, which blood does not do. And there are what look like bullet holes in the back. And given the location of those bullet holes, he shouldn't be standing, let alone walking unassisted. So it's fakery. They're trying to remarket terror. Terror's coming to get you. Over the weekend, I put together a joke movie poster called False Flag from the producers of 9/11, the Lavon Affair, and the USS Liberty. And that's going viral across the net. Feel free to copy it off. And Patrick Willis, who does the intro voiceovers for our show, put together a trailer video that's also going viral. And I think that's a very good thing. And this has nothing to do with my vanity and ego, of which I have a huge amount. It has to do with creating that climate of doubt. Because even today, despite the backlash against the lies in Syria, our government is still operating, apparently secure in the confidence that if they just make the lies big enough and bloody enough, that we'll forget all about all the other lies used to start wars, and we'll salute the flag and fling our money and our babies onto the designated enemy. And the only way we are going to deter a new false flag is to make them doubt that the official story will be believed. And the best way to do that is for all Americans to be talking about false flags in the past, the likelihood of a new one now, and when possible, make jokes about it. Make it funny so that it gets out there, so it's not psychologically threatening to people to consider the possibility of false flags. Now, we've got a story over here from Blacklisted News about how the British SAS is set to strike Somali al-Shabaab terror group. Al-Shabaab did this, Al-Shabaab did that. And I think what's going on here is they decided to rebrand the terrorists because too many people are now aware that Al-Qaeda in Arabic slang means the toilet. Nobody's buying that one. You know, we're from the toilet, we're going to terrorize you. And they go, start laughing. So Al-Qaeda is so last year, now it's Al-Shabaab. And they're really pushing this meme. And I'm very, very concerned that the attack on the mall in Nairobi is a prequel to get everybody thinking about Al-Shabaab, terror, 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 terror. Just like in the months before 9/11, we were seeing these small terror attacks that were always blamed on Osama bin Laden to sell the brand, to get the name recognition going. So that on 9/11, before the buildings had even collapsed, corporate media was out there saying, oh yes, it's Osama bin Laden, it's definitely Osama bin Laden. Really, there's no reason to doubt that it's Osama bin Laden. And over in DNA India, they're running a story on how U.S. intelligence claims Al-Shabaab planning new Kenya-like attacks. So it's a flashing neon sign. False flag coming, false flag coming, false flag coming. Now, we have talked a lot about the very obvious preparations being made by the federal government to declare war on the 50 states and on you, the American people, who are now all terror suspects because you prefer using cash, you don't like private central banking, you believe and support the Constitution of the United States of America, and all those other indicators that you're a terror suspect. Apparently down in Dallas, the county police have just acquired a 15-ton mine-resistant, ambush-protected, armored personnel carrier. This is military hardware, 15 tons. And the official story is they're using it to serve warrants. Well, since you can't drive a 15-ton vehicle into somebody's house to serve the warrant, obviously they're going to park it on the street, get out of that, and walk up to serve the warrant. So it's not really going to offer the police officers any added protection. What Dallas got this for is to crush protesters. That's what all these cities buying these armored vehicles and stocking up on ammunition and guns to crush protesters. And that is why my advice to everybody here is don't fall for it. This government wants something that looks like a violent uprising because that they are prepared to deal with decisively. They're preparing to fight last year's revolution. And this revolution is virtual. It's taking place here in the independent media, Republic Broadcasting. If we just stay calm and stand back and not give this government an excuse to declare a national emergency, it's all going to come crashing down all by itself, just like the Soviet Union did. And we'll be rid of this private central bank and this corrupted central government, and we'll restart the nation following the blueprint for the new America that we've been talking about, and life will be much better in this country just as it is in the Russian republics. Apparently another story of police abuse over at NBC Philadelphia. They're reporting that apparently a police officer serving a warrant on a home just fired shots into the home with children and the dogs present. The guy they wanted hadn't been there in 6 years. So I guess that total information awareness thing the NSA was talking about doesn't really work. Because they didn't know where the guy they wanted was. They had an address from 6 years ago that they served on. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. It's the Caribbean Critic here. I want to recap a little bit on your story of the visit of Netanyahu to America.
Yes.
Obviously pleading for more help. But it's my understanding, actually, now that they've abandoned this story of not denial and not affirming that they have nuclear weapons, but now we know they do. it's my understanding that it's actually illegal both internationally and in American law to actually support such a regime. I mean, is that correct?
Well, that's kind of a difficult question to answer because we've come to understand that what the official story is being fed to the American people is completely disconnected from the real political agenda taking place.
Yeah, but as I say, I understand now that they've almost admitted that they do have these nuclear, biological and chemical weapons, and they're not party to any of the treaties or inspections.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Even Israeli TV did a special on the nuclear bomb factory hidden underneath Dimona. And I think the reason that Israel finds its credibility and reputation in serious decline is because of the independent media. The world does understand. Israel has been posturing that they helpless, weak, don't have nuclear weapons, and they've had them all along. Now, here in the United States of America, the reason that the U.S. government will not officially acknowledge Israel's nuclear weapons, and you need to go back and look at Obama's first news conference as president when Helen Thomas put him on the spot and say, what nation in the Middle East today has nuclear weapons? And Obama put on his tap shoes and just tap danced away and never answered the question. Because all of this money taken from you, the American people, and given to Israel is a violation of United States law, specifically the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act. And so if it turns out that the U.S. has known all along Israel has nuclear weapons, we, the American people, are owed a refund on all that money. So they're caught in this, they're caught in this their web of lies. I'll tell you what, John, stay with me. I'm going to come right back to you after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. John in Barbados, what else did you want to share with us?
Well, it seems to me that now we have this UN resolution on Syrian chemical weapons, it is an auspicious moment to consider the same type of resolution, a bit of equanimity, and demanding that Israel submits its chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons to inspection or destruction.
Well, that's been suggested many, many times, but every time it comes up to the Security Council, the United States will veto any measure requiring that. The United Nations has asked Israel to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The U.S. has asked Israel to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty because of that legal thing regarding all that funding coming from our pockets to Israel. Israel keeps refusing. Their attitude is they want to go on selling clandestine nuclear weapons around the world, and they view the Non-Proliferation Treaty as simply guaranteeing them a market monopoly.
Well, I mean, what it really says to me is that all these vetoes that the U.S. puts forward in the Security Council just shows the hypocrisy of this administration and previous administrations.
Well, it just shows what it really shows is that Israel has succeeded in taking control of the U.S. federal government, and apparently Obama's acquiescence to Netanyahu's point of view that, yes, we'll go to war against Iran to make sure they don't have nuclear weapons. And I think what it is Netanyahu simply walks into the Oval Office and says, look, you do what I tell you to do, or we'll tell the world who really did 9/11, and it's going to be worse for you than for us because, hey, we're Israel. People expect us to pull these kind of dirty tricks, but it will discredit the United States government when the American people are confronted with the reality that this was a false flag operation staged by the U.S. and Israel.
Well, I mean, I did a little blog the other day, Michael, and one of my remarks was I see that the absent President of America is returning to Washington from Tel Aviv.
Well, I mean, I think it's very shameful. Anytime somebody wants to run for office in this country, what's the first thing they do? They go over to Israel and get their picture taken at the Wailing Wall. I mean, it's just absolutely shameful that, the U.S. government is just so totally compromised by this foreign power. I remember when I was in grade school, we were always being warned to look out for communist subversives, communist subversion of our government. It turns out our government was being subverted. We were being told to look in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. But, I mean, it seems to me that all these dual citizens or dual passport holders seem to have gained a reasonable stranglehold throughout the U.S. administration by usurping various positions like the Secretary of the Treasury and
the gorilla in the room, of course, is AIPAC, which is documented as basically getting money from Israel with which to bribe the U.S. government. And that's why members of Congress will always vote through new funding measures and additional funding. Israel's already asking for more money this week, as a matter of fact. And what it really is, it's a giant kickback scheme. Congress will go into session. They'll vote a bunch of your money to Israel in defiance of the Symington Amendment and the Glenn Act. And then Israel will send part of it back to the U.S. Congress. It's a kickback scheme.
Yes, Michael, but don't criticize Israel. You'll be an anti-Semitic, remember.
Oh, man, I get called that all the time, which is kind of weird because Rivero's a Sephardic name. Anyway, John, got to let you go. The phone lines are loading up, and I got to make room for Michelle Rosen at the top of the hour. So, Michael in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. I just wanted to see if you saw an article. It's an opinion in the New York Times. Actually, you can see it online. How 5 countries could become 14, and then I got really interested in it when I saw who wrote it. Robin Wright, CFR member. Mm-hmm. It has the second time I saw this map with Libya broken into 3 pieces. Mm-hmm. Somewhere else I saw it online. But what's very interesting was the Saudi Arabia map, because now I believe it's just a matter of time before the Western oligarchs turn on Saudi Arabia.
Oh, yeah, it's inevitable.
That was very telling.
No, this is what Israel's objective in that region is for all the large countries to be broken up into little, tiny, easy to scare and manipulate tiny countries. That's what they were trying to do in Iraq. That's what they want to do with Iran. They want to break them up into little, tiny countries smaller than Israel so that Israel can dominate them.
Does Saudi Arabia not see this? Why are they supporting?
Saudi Arabia is being dangerously naive in thinking that just because Saudi Arabia has worked with the U.S. petrodollar agenda and been their staunchest allies in the region, I'm in agreement where the Saudi royal family doesn't seem to understand that as soon as Israel says turn on Saudi Arabia, the U.S. government will do exactly that.
Thanks, Mike. Great show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Going to switch over to Mike in Illinois. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I had a question. It was about the Bay of Pigs. I was wondering if it was possible. I'm sure you've read recently about the accident in 1961 with the 2 nuclear bombs being dropped on North Carolina. Obviously didn't explode. But I was wondering, is the same time, 61, that was the time of Bay of Pigs, do you think that could have been a false flag that went bad or in the good and the other way?
I don't think so, because there really wouldn't have been much of a way to tie in a nuclear bomb on South Carolina to Cuba, because this was before the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, we do know that Operation Northwood was a plan to provoke war with Cuba by faking terror attacks and airline shoot-downs, but that went all the way to the top of the Department of Defense before it was vetoed.
So you think that the two nuclear bombs that were accidentally dropped on North Carolina was just pure negligence and an accident?
Well, I think if they were going to do a false flag, they only would have dropped one, and they would have made sure it went off.
That's true. I was wondering maybe if someone had averted at the last minute or something.
No, I don't think so. The way I read the story, the B-52 that was carrying these bombs literally fell apart in midair, and the bombs just fell out. And I think if somebody is planning a nuclear false flag in the United States, they're not going to fly overhead and drop the bomb because too many people might see the airplane. It'll be in a truck that they simply, drive in and park someplace and let it go off.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for your thought on that. Thank you.
All right, we're going to switch over to Bill in Texas. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello there. How you doing?
Doing okay.
I heard something this morning on the radio, and of course, I don't trust most things I hear until I verify it. So I actually looked it up and verified it that there is an exemption for Obamacare. Let me get back to the page, 272. Anyway, I downloaded the bill, and the bill is under 111 HR 3590 EAS. So I downloaded the bill and went to what the article referred to, and on page 272 and 273, they list an exemption for Obamacare, and according to the article, I had to go to the subsection to verify it. You know how they always refer to subsections.
Yeah.
But on the list, it's American Indians, Amish, Muslims, and Christian scientists. Not Christians, just Christian scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And you could claim a religious exemption. I'm luckily an American Indian myself, but so there is a few exemptions.
Well, you know,
to get
now
out
that
of
you mention it, according to family tradition, there's a tiny little bit of Huron in the woodpile on my mother's side of the family. So I guess I'm now exempt from Obamacare.
Well, there might be a big increase in the number of people at least going to a Muslim church once in a while. Then they can claim their exemption.
Or going
from
Amish,
Obamacare.
or signing up for Christian Science. Certainly.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. I was just surprised, and I looked it up myself to verify it and downloaded the bill.
Well, I would expect that if a lot of people start using that exemption, that there'll be an amendment to the bill. I mean, it's still being changed constantly. This thing it's still very much in flux, and yet it's supposed to go into effect starting tomorrow.
Yeah, that's on that bill. It's page 272 and page 273, which refer to the exemptions and then refer you to the subsections for the details.
All right, so by changing your religion to Islam, you can evade Obamacare, but then, of course, you're instantly a terror suspect, according to the National Security Agency.
Well, they're Christian Science. But it's hard to tell which is worse.
Well, you know, I mean, it's bizarre. I know. Well, I understand. I mean, if I were going to go, you know, a direction, if I didn't need all these computers to try and stop the war, I'd probably go Amish, because it's a lot like what I grew up with when I was a kid in New England farming country. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently the U.S. House of Representatives is getting ready to pass and send back to the Senate yet another version of the raising the debt ceiling. This one still retains the delay in Obamacare for 1 year, which makes sense when you understand that software system is not ready to go tomorrow. And they've added a couple of new demands, and this relates to the phone call we got earlier in the show, where all the exemptions are going to be taken out of Obamacare. That includes the exemptions for members of Congress and the President. That they're going to have to go through this same health care system as the ordinary American people. And I'm in agreement with that, because the way they're setting up Obamacare is like the former Soviet Union, where there was socialized medicine for all the ordinary people with placebos and sugar pills and all the rest of that, but the party elite got their separate, better doctors and better hospitals. We should not allow that in this country at all, not one tiny bit. Somebody sent me a capture of the original article about John McAfee, where, and apparently this was posted at Mercury News and then taken down. But what John McAfee is talking about is a device that you will buy that costs less than $100 that you plug into your internet that will scramble the NSA's attempts to break into your system and track what you're doing. And I can imagine the NSA is very unhappy about that. And remember, the NSA is only able to spy on you because they put backdoors into everything, including all the standard encryption systems. What we proved with our 3 NSA challenges is that anybody with a little knowledge of programming can come up with a method of encryption that the NSA will not be able to break in any reasonable amount of time. The NSA has this image, this reputation of being able to read anything at any time. Obviously, they didn't know that suspect the police were after had left 6 years ago. But decoding a message is a 2-step process, finding the method, then finding the key. And of the two, finding the method is the hard part. The Allies were not able to read the German Enigma code messages until they captured a physical machine off of a submarine. Then they had the method. Finding the keys after that was trivial in comparison. And so kudos to McAfee, because in the face of a government that absolutely is not complying with the Bill of Rights, responsibility for protecting the safety and security and privacy of your business secrets, cookie recipes, whatever, falls on you. You must take responsibility for protecting your privacy, because this government will not. And this government has a long established track record of stealing business secrets for their own profitability and purposes. Now, getting back to 9/11, we put up a new page regarding 9/11 on our website, and it's actually written by one of the regular contributors to our website. And it involves the so-called black boxes on the aircraft that were used for this false flag attack, because the official story we were given is they were not able to find or recover the black boxes. Specifically, the cockpit voice recorders, which would have documented exactly what was really going on board the aircraft prior to impact. And we were told, oh, they didn't survive. Couldn't find them, they weren't gone. And yet, in looking through the news coverage of the day, we find instance after instance where they are saying, yes, they did in fact locate and recover those flight data recorders and cockpit voice recorders. So obviously there was something going on those cockpit voice recorders that completely contradicts the official story. And that's why they had to go away. It's just one more indicator that 9/11 was just a gigantic lie. And this government still continues to conceal things from you here. Now, here's an interesting story. Russia is considering a complete ban on all GMO inside Russia. They are very much concerned about the indications of serious health consequences from consuming GMOs. They saw that French study involving the rats. They're in the middle of conducting their own study on rats, and it's gone more than 4 months now, so they're already seeing a result. And they're refusing any more American-made GM corn. And they may go the way that Hungary did, literally burn those fields to get rid of that dangerous, dangerous pollen. And, of course, that's going to result in a brouhaha. We must invade Russia. Monsanto wills it. Monsanto wills it. It's a holy war. All righty. More criticism coming out regarding the recent UN report on global warming. We're 95% sure that it's a fault of humans. And they're even acknowledging that they watered it down, but it turns out that new UN report does sort of grudgingly concede that, yeah, there's a pause in warming. You know, that even though all their dire forecasts of snow-free winters and ice-free Arctic didn't actually come about, you should just go on believing them when they say that the world is getting warmer and it's your fault, and you will atone by buying carbon credits and paying carbon taxes and doing what a global environmental authority tells you to do. So we're seeing articles like, even in the Telegraph, saying climate change, this is not science, it's mumbo-jumbo. And it's morally outrageous. And they're predicting that the world is not going to pay much attention to that IPCC report, which is probably a good thing. Over at the Corbett report, he had a really, really good documentary on exposing the IPCC. And in it, he points out, or one of his guests points out, that when the IPCC was set up, their mandate was to only look at human contributions to global warming. They were specifically directed right from the start not to look at any other mitigating factors at all. This is kind of like the U.S. government's report on 9/11 that was told only to look at intelligence failures and not even examine the question of who actually did 9/11. No, you don't want to look at that. You know, just point at the intelligence failures. That's like trying to investigate the Titanic by only looking at the metallurgy of the hull. And we don't pay attention to that big chunk of ice, or the missing binoculars, or Captain E.J. Smith's caving into management of the White Star Line to just put the pedal to the metal and charge on through a known iceberg field. You would get a very nice report on the questionable metallurgy of the Titanic's hull, but you wouldn't really understand what happened. Same thing with 9/11. Their report was all about intelligence failures. Didn't even mention Building 7 at all, because they didn't have an explanation for it coming down into its own footprint. And now we're finding out that the IPCC was constrained from the very start from looking at anything regarding climate and warming other than human causes, because they're pushing a political agenda. Even the UK Met Office, which was severely embarrassed a few years ago when they predicted a snow-free winter for Britain, and it turned out to be one of the heaviest winters on record. Even the Met Office is now admitting that, yeah, warming is on pause. There has been no warming for 17 years and doesn't seem to show any signs of ending. They're admitting there's been no warming, and they're still out there saying, we're the Met Office, and we're the government people, and we're the academics, and we've got plaques on the wall saying that you should believe us when we tell you the warming will return. It's hiding in the deep ocean. It's hiding under Antarctica. It's waiting for you to relax your guard, and then it will leap out on you and broil your children. Apparently, a scientist over at MIT is calling the new IPCC report ridiculous. So they're raising on a busted flush. And I've been getting the flood of email from addresses I've never seen before about, oh, really, you're a denier. You're a climate denier. Look, they blew the predictions. That's the bottom line. Their predictions failed. Period. End of discussion. Break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We'll be back with Michelle Rosen after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us on the line now is Michelle Rosen. And this is all about the Tylenol poisonings that took place about 30 years ago, which is the reason that today everything you buy in the store has the tamper-proof seal. I went down to the hardware store the other day to get some insecticide for my little tiny garden I've got out back there, and it had a tamper-proof seal, I guess on the theory that somebody might break into my poison to poison it. So, Michelle, aloha. Thank you for spending time with us today. And what's going on now with the FBI and the Tylenol case?
Thanks for having me, Michael. Always a pleasure with you. You always do such a good job on this topic. You're good. What's going on now? Well, the FBI has thrown in the towel. They have given up the case and given it back to the local authorities, the police departments that who should have had it in the first place. The FBI had no jurisdiction in the first place, so great that after 31 years they've decided to give it back to them. Had they done this in the first place, we would have actually had a solved case, and you wouldn't have corporate interests involved and destroyed evidence. If the FBI never got involved in the first place, because
they were trying to frame the Unabomber for this thing at one point. I mean, that's...
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I'm sorry. It's funny to start off like this. Unabomber, yeah. Who's next? You know, it could be you. If the Unabomber could be the Tylenol killer, it could be anyone.
It's the Iranians. It's the Iranians. Those Syrian, Iranians, whatever. Okay.
Terrorists everywhere. Yeah, it was Unabomber in May of 2011. That was a desperate act, and the great thing about that is, which I hate even that you have a sick person like the Unabomber. I personally don't know him, so I don't even know what crimes he actually committed, but I don't know what he's guilty of. I wasn't there, but I will say it was that move that they did that was good for me and our way of getting the truth out, because it just made the case ridiculous. That was the first time it actually became absolute.
Okay, we're having a problem where Michelle's Skype connection is cutting in and out. But I seem to recall, just as a complete side note to this whole situation, it turned out the Unabomber was one of those volunteers that were experimented on as part of MK Ultra, and prior to that, he was just a normal, very brilliant student, all A's on his way up to accomplishing something amazing, and then apparently he was part of this MK Ultra thing, and he came out the backside with some very strange views about the world. but they were trying to basically blame the Unabomber for the Tylenol case. Now, the official story of the Tylenol case is that for some unknown reason, some unknown individual walked into the stores and bought a bunch of Tylenol, took it home, opened it up, poisoned some of the pills, and then went back to the store and put them on the shelves. Now, again, operating from the principle of looking for what should be there and isn't, what's the motive for somebody to do something like that? And as it turns out, and Michelle, I'm going to ask you to elucidate on this, it turned out that the official story was crafted not because that's what the evidence showed, but to protect the financial fortunes of the company that makes Tylenol.
Exactly. This whole lone man traveling store to store, tainting capsules, they could get away with it because there weren't video cameras watching your every move in grocery stores back then. It was to protect the corporate interests, so Johnson & Johnson would not have to pay the families for liability, not just the liability of it altogether, just for the 7 families, but for their market share altogether. If they could conjure up and get the FBI and the FDA to be on their side, which they were, on that end, they could release themselves of liability, come up with a safety seal just 5 weeks later, miraculous, and grab as much market share as they possibly could with a family company that you can trust. So they did this, and it worked.
But the actual evidence points to the poisonings taking place inside Johnson & Johnson itself. As part of the classic
distribution center.
Yeah, the distribution center. As part of this, it's almost like a script from a really cheap murder mystery where somebody wants to poison somebody intentionally, and they poison a bunch of other people to make it look like it's random killings.
Well, actually, that lie came up with this case. They started that stuff to make the public believe, because this happened a few times. It happened with Excedrin as well. That's not a copycat killing. That's actually a problem in distribution where they make it look like somebody wants to kill one person. So they taint that. That person dies, but I'm going to go to these stores and do that. That actually has never happened in real life.
Okay.
That story and that copycat thing has been made up to save the pharmaceutical industry from any liability, to make people believing that there's sicko husbands out there that would do this, or wives. So,
well, what was the reason for the poisoning in the first place?
Well, I have no idea. It's a sick guy. But what we believe is that he worked in the distribution channel, repackaging facility, and I believe they had a great suspect out there. And if I went on him, Roger Arnold, who conveniently died in 2008, so we'll never get any answers. Right after the Freedom of Information Act kicked in, he's dead in jail. But had we gone on what he was doing, he was just a really angry person who just hated people. He said he wanted to kill mass amounts of people. He hated them, and everyone made him mad. He did go into a North Side Chicago bar, shaking white powder just after the murders, saying that I can kill all of you with this. The bartender tips off the cops. They end up bringing him in on a warrant, whatever, searched his house. He's got 2 one-way tickets to Thailand. He's known to have cyanide, which he said he got rid of last month, but they never went into where he got rid of it, so we know where it went. And, he had books on how to kill mass amounts of people. He had books that talked about, poor man's James Bond, or how to kill mass amounts of people with cyanide. So I believe that's the guy. Unfortunately, he's gone now. So we'll never be able to close the case. All the evidence, as you know, once the murders happened, all of the bottles were turned over by the FBI to the corporation. Johnson & Johnson wanted to look like the do-gooders, which they still do to this day. The gold standard of crisis management they've got.
Yep.
They turned over all the bottles of them, and Johnson & Johnson didn't even test them. They tested like thousands, not at all the millions that they claim, and destroyed it all. They wanted to get rid of that as quickly as they possibly could.
Now, before we go any further here, because we're coming up on a commercial break, and I'm going to bring you through to the next segment on this thing, but just so that our audience understands where you're coming from, the reason this is so important to you is that your mother was one of the victims of the Tylenol poisoning.
My mom was a 27-year-old mother of 4. She had just given birth 6 days before this event happened. She was given extra-strength Tylenol from the hospital. She came home, and she died from it. To cover this up, my mother is the smoking gun in this whole thing because she only had regular-strength bottle that she bought. She died from extra-strength Tylenol poisoning. How did that get in her bottle? Well, the hospital is the key. But to cover up the liability, again, to make sure the lone nut story, store to store, happened, they were able to cover this whole thing up and not exaggerate the fact that she brought the regular strength Tylenol, which they did not recall at all. So they knew where it came from. Okay, now I want to get on to the idea. The reason the case has dragged on all this long is as long as the case is officially open, the FBI and now the local authorities can refuse Freedom of Information Act requests for the actual files and data. And this is a way of sort of stonewalling what's going on. If the FBI is throwing in the towel and saying we can't solve it, you would think they would mark the case closed, and at that point, independent researchers such as yourself could start filing those Freedom of Information Act requests for the raw files and the original data, but by simply transferring it back to the local jurisdiction and letting them keep the case open, it's a way of basically forestalling any further digging into this case. We're coming up now on a commercial break here, and Michelle, when we come on back, I want to let you finish up on this case, and I understand you and your co-author have your book out about this, and any other new information that you may have about the FBI announcement. So we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Michelle Rosen, whose mother was one of the victims of the Tylenol poisonings case 30 years ago. And again, I think in our current age where we understand the U.S. government absolutely panders to corporate interests, whether it's concealing the dangers of GMO from the public, concealing the dangers of vaccine adjuvants, concealing the dangers of SSRI, antidepressants, from the public in furtherance of corporate profitability and whatever political agenda they're hooking onto it. I don't think people are going to be particularly surprised to understand that this was going on 30 years ago in order to protect Johnson & Johnson from the liability that the poisonings actually took place in their distribution center. And, my next question is, especially talking about Johnson & Johnson culpability, with this obviously mentally deranged individual, how did Human Resources ever clear him for use in such a sensitive area? Well, maybe he just got the job, and once he was there, he played a nice role, and he did it. I mean, I have no idea who this guy is. If it really is Roger Arnold, who we truly believe it could be, that was the best suspect. This guy's actually saying, I did it, and then he's dead. As soon as all this stuff comes to a head, I would love to have had a conversation with him. I know that all of this case it cannot be solved now. There's no way of solving it. But with all the evidence destroyed, we have some capsules that have been touched over and over and over again by lab workers without wearing gloves. We've got proof of that. All the news showed that back in the 80s. There's no way of solving it with the evidence that we have. We'll just keep carting out James Lewis, the extortion writer. Please, he is not your killer. America, let him go. The guy wrote an extortion letter. He's not the guy. It's so unfair to him. I know he brought himself into it, but the guy's been, re-examined so many times. Well, what we do need to look at, I just want to say that the eighth bottle is the most important. My mom is the smoking gun because she's the one with the regular strength. The eighth bottle is the other smoking gun that has this because the eighth bottle was turned in by a DuPage County judge's wife. 2 weeks after the murder, it has a different cyanide than the rest of them, and this is DuPage County. This is where Johnson & Johnson already placed their lawyers and their men. The eighth bottle actually gives light to show that the American people should stop believing this nonsense and look into that eighth bottle. If we can get our hands on that and see that a judge's wife turned this in, the next day all of a sudden it's another judge's wife, then this one goes and says it wasn't me, and then the other judge's wife says it was, to find out this pair was working together. They turn in a bottle of tainted capsules weeks later, and then they never followed up. The news has never touched that again. That's worth looking into.
All right. Well, tell us about your book and your co-author.
Okay. So, Scott Bartz is the author, The Tylenol Mafia, Marketing, Murder, and Johnson & Johnson. Still available on Amazon. Go on Amazon. It's there, the ebook there. He also wrote a trilogy, Timers, for those who are don't really want to read the encyclopedia of the Tylenol murders, really don't want to get in deep with the college buddies and who and blah, blah, blah. You could just go on and get Timers, T-Y-M-U-R-S. That is the FBI code word for the Tylenol murders back then. So Scott is in New Jersey still, he's got a nice little thank you from the court ordered from Johnson & Johnson, not allowed to promote the case in this way or show it in this light. So it's just me now. And,
really?
Really?
He got hit with a court order. He can't talk about it. It's like, Bill Benson in his book, The Law That Never Was.
He can, right. He could do, so get the book while you can, because they're going to pull that too. They've already tried. And that's not an advertisement at all for the book. It really is truly awesome. We did a lot of work on that. It's brought a new light, a whole different group of people that are opening up to this. This has been just a painful circus this whole time. So with the book and the things that we're doing, it's not to be the let's bring up the victims again. We're not exploiting them. What we're doing is showing the wrong in the destroying of evidence and the eighth bottle. We want to just keep bringing that up as much as we can. And sure enough, just our voices, it's making differences with what Chicago reported this week on mainstream media, is taking what we've said. They spin it. Of course, they spin it. They cut out all the good parts and they spin it. But they're bringing up certain things that goes to show that the voices that we've had over the last 5 years has been working. I mean, it's making a difference. I'm not saying they're backed into a corner, but I'm saying that it's changing the way they're doing it. Look they're handing over all this to locals now. So don't think I'm done. I will be hitting up every single local.
I wouldn't think that. And again, I think the big change right now, of course, is the American people are now well aware of the extent to which they're lied to by government and corporations to serve corporate interests. And again, this story of the Tylenol poisonings, it's not this unique, shocking incident in history. It's business as usual. And there have been so many examples of this, bad products being sold, and the government just works with the corporations to come up with a scenario that protects the corporations from lawsuits, because obviously, given that this did take place inside the distribution center, Johnson & Johnson was financially liable to the families of the victims. Michelle, I'm going to let you go here. Thank you very much for spending some time with us today. And if anything new breaks about this case, please do not hesitate to get back in touch with me.
I'll have it solved before the end of the year, honey.
All righty. I look forward to it. Thank you very much. All right, that was Michelle Rosen, and she is the daughter of one of the victims of the Tylenol poisonings. And again, in this day and age, we understand that government and the corporate media aren't about telling us the truth. They're about telling us a convenient lie that protects the financial interest, because money is more important than Americans to this government and corporatocracy, if you will, here. Now, speaking of bad drugs, you've probably been hearing a lot lately about this Russian drug called Crocodile, that supposedly when you're taking it, it's a synthetic opiate, and it causes serious damage to your skin. And it's called Crocodile because your skin will develop these scales on it that look somewhat like crocodile skin. It turns out this drug did not originate in Russia. It is apparently a highly impure form of a synthetic opioid called desomorphine, which was patented here in the United States of America back in the 1930s. And for those of you who indulge in recreational drugs, you do have to be very careful here. Because especially during the 1990s, there was this push for designer drugs, where they would take something that was illegal, and they would change a few molecules around so that they would come up with a new synthetic drug that wasn't on the schedule of banned substances, so they could go out and sell it in bars and stuff. Some of them were very dangerous. There was a product in Southern California called China White, not to be confused with the real China White, which is very pure Chinese heroin, but this involved a molecule called D-alpha-fentanyl, which is a synthetic opiate that had a tendency to permanently bind to sites in the brain, leading to Parkinson's-like diseases, and the people who took this opiate and got high on it wound up permanently crippled from it. So, if you're going to indulge in what Mother Nature has produced, like Pacalolo or whatever, because we've co-evolved with those molecules over millions of years, and there are no ugly surprises in there. We see how reckless pharmaceutical companies are with their altered molecules to allow patentability. We've seen how reckless Monsanto and other companies are with genetic modifications. Obviously, the illegal drug labs producing these designer recreational drugs are going to be even more reckless than that. So you really do need to be careful. And I could sit here and say, don't do drugs, which is probably a good idea anyway, but it's just an issue of practicality. And safety first, safety first, safety first. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as you're probably aware, there is going to be a massive protest by big rig truck drivers in Washington, D.C. From October 11th to the 13th. And in theory, Congress will be in session on October 11th, so they're going to get to look out the windows and look at all these truckers. They're calling it Truckers' Ride for the Constitution, and they're calling for the restoration of the constitutional republic, which is a laudable ideal. And apparently there is now organizing a simultaneous effort all across the country to rally on overpasses across the nation with signs calling for the immediate impeachment of Barack Obama. Now, I don't expect this is going to get a lot of coverage in the corporate media, because the corporate media wants you to think that Americans are happy and Americans love their private central bank and Americans love their government, and we don't want to muddy up anybody's positive feelings for the government and the bankers with pictures of Americans out there saying they've had enough. So we're going to make a point here in the independent media of giving this protest the attention it is due. And I stress this is a non-violent, non-confrontational demonstration. There's nothing going to be happening there where the government can say, oh, national emergency, martial law, gosh darn you truckers. But I think we've reached a point in our nation's history where we, the people, have got to get out there in public and be visible and be seen as we shout to the rest of the world, we are not party to the crimes of the United States government and Wall Street. We don't agree with it. We didn't vote for it. We don't support it. We know they are lying to us and the rest of the world. And we will not be assigned collective guilt for all that's been going on. Nor will we be the wallets of last resort for all of Wall Street's failed scams, mostly because we don't have any money left out here to cover these costs. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that coming up on the 11th of next month. Now, over in, interview with Dr. Don Huber, and this is taking place out here in Hawaii, basically documenting even more information about GMOs and glyphosate impact. Now, Hawaii, unfortunately, gets used for a lot of testing for GMO and other products. I guess the theory of operation is if they make a really bad mistake and something happens, well, it's just Hawaii, they're in the middle of the Pacific, and will contain the damage. But we have all kinds of experimental fields of non-approved GMO growing on all of the islands. There's a whole bunch of them up on the north shore of Oahu. And again, this GMO technology, this is the most dangerous technology humans have ever been involved in. They're literally tinkering with the code of life itself. There have already been several major mistakes, and it's being recklessly handled, irresponsibly handled, recklessly deployed, all in the name of more and more profits. And I applaud Russia for considering a complete outright ban in their entire country for any GMO at all. Now, over the weekend, I actually saw on the corporate media a story about the Morgellons disease. Now, this has been around for quite some time, mostly focused, I think, in Central California and up into Oregon and Washington. And it's being treated as a mystery. Nobody knows what's going on, where people all of a sudden are getting this strange infection. There's a neurological component. They feel like they're itching constantly, and these strange fibers pop out of their skin. Now, I remember reading an analysis a while back where somebody took some of these fibers from one of these patients and analyzed it and found plant DNA in it. And so I think we ought to raise the distinct possibility, given the proximity of these afflicted people with these test fields, that we're looking at a serious accident from GMO technology. Now, I don't know that we are, but I think it's a question that should be asked, because we've been seeing from all these genetic modification companies, oh, it's perfectly safe, it's perfectly safe, it's perfectly safe. And we know that to be a lie. We know about that French study that kept the rats alive for the rats' entire lifespan. They didn't just stop at 3 months, which is where Monsanto did, because in month number 4 is where the problems start to surface. Reproductive issues, massive tumors, shortened lifespan. And sooner or later, it's inevitable there are going to be major mistakes, and they're going to be covered up here. And I think an area of concern I've mentioned before has to do with what's called the epicite gene. This is a genetically modified corn funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that produces antibodies to human sperm in the corn, which means if you eat the corn, you will be unable to have children. Now, if that corn pollen broke into the wild, like we've already seen the contamination of Oregon wheat fields, alfalfa fields, if that epicite gene has broken into the wild and is contaminating corn around the world, we're looking at a potential extinction level event. And people have a right to be concerned. Now, getting back to the brouhaha over the IPCC's latest global warming tripe, Popular Science just announced today on their website they will no longer allow any commenting. And the excuse there is that because commenters coming onto their articles about things like global warming are eroding the popular consensus. In other words, Popular Science is seeing more and more people coming onto the comment section on their articles and saying, no, this is not proven, this is bad science. And so they're just going to shut off the comments and say, this is what we're telling you, and you are not allowed to share your concerns about it with anybody. Now, what I think is going to happen, this will mean fewer people will be reading Popular Science because the public now has a taste for being part of the process, for being able to contribute to the discussion, for having the freedom to stand up there and say, look, you guys were predicting snow-free winters, and we've had several record-setting winters since then. There must be a problem with the original theory. And I think this will drive even more and more readers and listeners to the independent media, where the First Amendment, not to mention the truth, is still respected. We're going to grab a phone call here. Mark in Philadelphia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. I'd like to just share some things with you that have come to me over the last few days, especially, and I wanted to ask you about them. This deal about, I've been reading that FEMA 3 region has been preparing and for potential something to happen. What I'm noting here is that they ordered a bunch of supplies. They've been practicing their drills or whatever, and the deadline was supposed to be today. And FEMA 3, anyway, the other thing about that is that there's a lot of parts of this that have come together for me, and I'm wondering about this. Columbus Day is, it's incorrect history, and the ones that are in the know that.
Isn't most of it.
But I believe the cabal actually celebrates Columbus as a conquistador that he was, along with Cortez, who conquered the New World. Hello, keywords, New World, and how did they do it? They didn't do it with a couple hundred men off a boat, killing tens of thousands. They did it with pandemics that they brought along with them, whether they knowingly did or not. But anyway, that's what happened from what we understand. And so the other thing is, anyway, I'm sensing that something could happen in FEMA Region 3 on Columbus Day. I'm
in agreement. I don't know about Columbus Day.
Not necessarily Columbus Day, but Columbus weekend.
Basically, this is going to be a rough month for the U.S. government. The Syrian war policy has gone off the track. Even though they're still screaming about sanctions on Iran, that clearly is coming off the track. The American people don't want war with Iran. They figure whatever Iran's doing, that's Iran's problem, and our government needs to stop pandering to Israel and take care of this country. But we know that starting tomorrow, the third quarter earnings reports are going to start coming out. They're not expected to be very good. We've got a jobs report due on Friday that is, despite all the rigging and manipulation, is probably not going to be very good as well. We've got a potential government shutdown as of tonight. The stock market is not doing very well. We know that right now the euro and the dollar are very much in decline against the yuan, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to maintain this fraud of a healthy economy for very much longer. And so I'm absolutely convinced they're at least considering a new false flag to get the war agenda going again. With this FEMA Region 3, again, a really symbolic, iconic target for the terrorists to knock down would be that Washington Monument, because it's already been weakened by that fracking earthquake. And, it does. They're desperate. They're backed into a corner, and I'm in agreement with you. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And President Obama is about to make a speech about a possible government shutdown. It was scheduled for 4 minutes ago, and as usual, he's basically stalling, building the drama and the suspense. He really is very predictable when you come to understand the cheap theatrics he resorts to. Interesting little story that came out of BusinessWeek.com called The Honey Launderers. And basically it involves prosecution of a company that was buying very low-cost honey produced in China and circuitously bringing it to the United States of America, because honey is imported from nations like Argentina, Brazil, Canada, and other trading partners. China's honey is kept out of the United States of America because of complaints that they're able to undersell all those other honey supporters. And the story is written to demonize this company. How dare they go out and get Chinese honey and bring it into this country? And they're trying to demonize the people bringing in a low-cost product. But the real story here is that the U.S. government, in collusion with the honey producers, is keeping out competition, which increases prices for already struggling U.S. consumers. And by the way, something else you need to know. A lot of what is sold in your supermarket as honey actually isn't. It's a concoction, honey-flavored sugar water, a lot of high fructose corn syrup. So if you want real honey, especially raw honey, which has a lot of medicinal properties to it, you need to go over to your health food store or natural store and really make sure you're getting it. If you just want the flavor of honey, then you can get the stuff at the supermarket, and that'll be just fine for you. Now, interesting little story posted by a member. I'm very sensitive to issues of astronomy. We're getting ready to see whatever comet Ison is going to do, which will be whipping around the sun in November and then whizzing past Earth. And no, there is no possibility that it's going to hit the Earth. I know the government propagandists are putting that out all over the net to make the net look kooky. Oh, it's Nibiru, it's Planet X, it's going to... No, it isn't. But there is one interesting possibility. Comet Ison could very easily break apart as it flies by the sun, because it's a grazing comet. And we saw how Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 was pulled into 9 separate components by Jupiter's gravity. So we may have a once-in-a-lifetime view in November of a formation of comets flying past. That'll be kind of interesting to look at. Meanwhile, you've probably heard in the media over the last couple of weeks about these amazing fireballs coming down to Earth, over the Earth, over the United States, where people are calling the police and saying, oh my goodness. And Russian scientists say that we just had a near miss with another 15-meter asteroid, like the one that came down and broke all the windows a little less than a year ago. And apparently the organizations that track meteor falls are saying that, yes, all of a sudden we're seeing a surge in the number of these large meteors. So if you're the sort of person who likes to sit out at night, you might want to keep your eyes on the sky, because it looks like we're getting a little bit of a show that's coming on down there. Okay, they're still nattering and grommishing and waiting for Obama to show up here. And somebody else posted another story I needed to mention as we talk about the potential for a false flag. We know that about the same time Lindsey Graham was talking about how Charleston Harbor would be nuked if we didn't attack Syria, that a nuclear weapon was transferred to the East Coast without the appropriate paper trail. And in an amazing coincidence, the vice commander of the military arm in charge of our nation's nuclear weapons has been removed from position, supposedly over a gambling scandal. Which I'm not buying that. It's like when somebody gets removed for having an affair. If you fired everybody in Washington, D.C. who was catching a little on the side, the town would be empty. Same thing with military people. If you fired everybody who was gambling, you'd lose most of your people. It's just the way it is here. But this was a story back in 2007 involving this very strange flight of a bomber that left Minot Air Force Base and then arrived at Barksdale with loaded nuclear-armed cruise missiles on the wing pylons. It was supposed to be a big mistake that somebody just went into the warehouse and, golly gee shuckies, instead of getting the practice cruise missiles, they got actual nuclear-armed missiles and put them on the wing pylons. Now, first of all, practice weapons are color-coded blue. So for what you're putting on the wing pylon isn't painted blue, it's not a practice weapon. Second of all, because these weapons are so powerful and so dangerous and so desired, the United States has strict protocol controls over these weapons. So how they could have been put on this airplane is a mystery, unless somebody was getting ready to just fly this bomber over and go ahead and nuke Iran or something. But the interesting point is that supposedly there were 6 nuclear weapons on this plane when it left Minot, but when it arrived at Barksdale, there were only 5, and the flight crew of this airplane died under mysterious circumstances shortly thereafter. So in addition to this bomb that moved to the East Coast last week, from back in 2007, there is one unaccounted for nuclear weapon loose somewhere inside the United States of America. And that's not counting anything Israel may have here. Remember when the Nuclear Emergency Search Team was doing their baseline maps over New York to make it easier to spot the emergence of a new radioactive source, they discovered that the Israeli consulate was putting out a radioactive signature. And, of course, Israel won't allow Nest in there to take a look and see what's going on. But remember, Israel got their first round of weapons-grade uranium from right here in the United States of America. And it would have been very easy for them to send only part of that over to Israel and keep the rest in the United States. Because once you have that weapons-grade uranium, building a bomb around it is very, very simple. We're not talking plutonium implosion device. The uranium bomb, it's just a pipe with a subcritical mass chunk of uranium at both ends. You slap them together, it goes bang. That's the secret of the uranium bomb. And so it's entirely possible that Israel kept some of that material inside the United States with which to make a bomb to either false flag or blackmail the U.S. government. Do what we say or Washington, D.C. will vanish. And from its past history, Lavon affair, attack on the Liberty, phony radio transmitters in Tripoli, we can't put anything past Israel at this stage. And they are desperate, desperate, desperate to get their war agenda back on track. They know they're dealing with an American public that has wised up to all the lies, frauds, and deceptions used to start wars throughout our history. They're basically down to where a new false flag really is their final card to play. And that's why I made up that little poster at the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. It's a spoof movie poster called False Flag, and I invite you all to just take it, copy it off, send it to all your friends. Because the more we talk about this, the more we joke about it, the more we're going to create that climate of doubt. We have to break through the government's absolute self-assurance that they can lie to us with impunity. We have to make them doubt. Doubt is our most potent weapon against a new false flag and any more wars. So we have to keep up the pressure. Okay, somebody in my chat room is saying actually the plane did land with all the bombs intact, but one was missing the next morning at Barksdale. I stand corrected on that issue. All righty, let's see. We're almost at the top, so okay, they're still waiting for Obama, so we're not going to be able to comment on what he says here on our show today. But we know these are very dark times. We know we are dealing with the government and corporate media that lies to us about everything to achieve certain ends, whether it's carbon taxes, carbon credits, war on Iran, selling us the latest vaccine. Apparently they're fanning up there's a flu pandemic coming. We're activating the emergency broadcasting system to get you to run down and buy your shot of whatever. And what they're selling us is dangerous. That's just the bottom line. All right, there's the music. It's time for us to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay angry. Make good decisions, stay informed. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting and Aloha America.